Welcome to She's a Full-On Monet, a digital lifestyle magazine for women. Every week, our editor-in-chief, Kelly Castillo, along with Megan Block and special guests, participate in a deep dive discussion about recent articles and topics we have covered. We invite you to become part of our community where everyone's welcome. You can totally sit with us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to She's a Full-On Monet. Thank you guys for joining us as always. I'm your host, Kelly, and I have with me Megan.
Hello, hello.
And we just want to thank you guys. Every week, we appreciate you guys for coming back and sharing this journey with us. And I hope you guys are all getting something out of it. So we do kind of switch back and forth, as you guys know, from topic to topic. Today, we're going to talk about, I think, which is a little bit heavier topic, which is gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
And what is gaslighting? How do you know if it's happening to you and what to do about it?
Exactly.
So yeah, this is a topic that, is a term I feel like just kind of became mainstream.
Yes. I hear it more and more. And I, for a while, was like, well, dang, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. For a long time, I didn't understand. But once I did, I was like, oh my gosh, this has happened to me so many times in my life. And I didn't have a word for it. Mm-hmm. So to define gaslighting for those of you who are like Megan and I and didn't know what it means.
Out of the loop.
Right. It's a psychology term, and it basically refers to a very specific type of manipulation where people make you doubt your own memory, make you doubt your recollection of events, or question your reality. And that, in a nutshell, is gaslighting. There's a lot of different relationships this can happen in, and a lot of different ways it can happen intentionally and unintentionally. But that is the gist of it. I think everybody has probably been in that situation at some point in their lives.
Yes. No, I mean, I don't know if it's the exact same thing, but I would do it to my kids sometimes when they were super little. They'd be like, you told me I could have a cookie. I'm like, no, I don't think I did. And they'd be like, oh, maybe you did. And I'd be like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm not one to, from what I know of, gaslight others, but I have had that happen to me in the past, and I haven't really quite understood how to explain it or put a term to it. So I'm glad that somebody nailed that, and it's becoming more talked about, because it can really mess a person up, if you get it done to you, depending on the relationship in which you're getting it, but if it's like a very close one, like a significant other, I mean, I
think this type of situation probably happens the most in close relationships or power dynamic relationships. So I would say you'd probably find this the most between a parent and a child, like you just talked about.
Yeah, sorry.
Or between spouses or relationship partners. But it can also happen between a boss and employee, or a supervisor and an employee, for sure. So
or between friendships, when one friend might be more, one person's more passive,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I experienced this probably most when I was in high school. Yeah. A lot of times my friends would tell me, like, you're being overly sensitive. It's not a big deal. We didn't even know you were going to be upset about this. Like, if everybody was invited to something and they excluded me, or if everybody was we used to do those big group calling, like where you actually had to dial the next person in and the whole thing. And then
girls.
Yeah. And I wasn't on the call. Then they would be like, oh, well, we thought you said you were busy, or we didn't know it was going to bother you, or any of those things.
Yeah.
So that is a form of gaslighting. It's not just saying that never happened. It's also saying, that you didn't think it was a big deal, or they're blowing it out of proportion. That is also a form of gaslighting.
Yes. Yes. And in high school, when we're most influenced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is at that moment in our life, the most, horrible thing to happen to us. And the most, all that exists in our world is homework and that drama between our friends. Right. That can be really influential to how you go about your adult life,
Yeah.
So, and that happened to me a lot in high school too.
Yeah. And I mean, even when I was in high school, when I would try to talk to my dad, who obviously he was a dad and not a woman, or my grandmother about a conflict I was having with a boyfriend or a friend, I would get told, this isn't even a big deal. You're not going to remember this in a year from now. Like you're you're overblowing it, or this, you shouldn't respond this way, this emotionally to this. And it's kind of like erasing my reality of my feelings, by telling me that I didn't have the right to feel the way that I was feeling. And I think a lot of it was generational, because like my grandmother lived through the Great Depression and losing a child and divorces. And like to her, it really wasn't a big deal. But
exploring our feelings and being open about them is a new concept to us as humans. We're now, and that's cool, because parents like you and me and younger generations are changing that, and becoming more okay with talking about your feelings and not, pushing them back and making them feel like there's something, because during the Depression, there was like, I'm sorry,
there was real problems, like real problems,
like not like those aren't real problems, but like, you kind of had to have a tougher skin back then, not like you can't now, but it's more open to be okay with it's okay not to be okay, and people are opening up to that idea. So
I mean, it was hard for me when my daughters were teenagers and would come to me with really like basic girl drama, to not tell them this doesn't matter in the long run, like you're not going to even remember this when you're older, because the feelings they're having at that moment are very real.
They are you don't want to discount that. And it's right when we're dealing with the things that we deal with as adults and we're hearing these things, you're like, but to them, that is their biggest issues, and they want to feel heard, and they won't come to you, like we've talked about in previous podcasts. They won't come to you for the big things if they can't come to you for this, what you think is the small things. So, you can't gaslight your children.
No, I mean, it's hard though, because at the same time, when brain is still developing, which I think scientists are saying it still develops until you're like 25. Really? While your brain is still developing, you genuinely do not have long-term thinking. It is not something that your brain is really capable of doing. So that's why every problem you have as a teenager feels like it's the end of the world. Like, I'm always going to feel like this. It's never going to get any better. This was the one man for me, right? And you're like 15. And like, we broke up and now I'll be alone forever.
And you roll your eyes at your daughter, but then you think back when you were 15 and that was literally how you were feeling. And like, let her go through that too, let her experience that too. Cause like, we all found someone else out. It wasn't the end of the world. Never. But at the moment it is. And
unfortunately, that's one of the issues with the high suicide rates of children and teenagers, is because they don't have long-term thinking skills yet. It's not, their brain isn't even developed in that way. So when they're happy, they think they're always going to be happy. And when they're sad, they think the sadness is going to last forever. And it seems unendurable, and that's hard, because it's hard to explain to someone that their brain isn't capable of thinking right without gaslighting them.
Yeah, it's kind of impossible to do.
Yeah, it really is.
Even if you bring science into it, it still feels a little like making them feel less than at a time when, I'm sorry, they feel like they know everything.
Right. That's why they
enjoy that.
They have those national campaigns of It Gets Better, because that's a simple way to say it, this is not forever. It does get better. Everything always, flows, right? Good and bad is part of life. So it does get better. And then, it'll get bad again eventually, and it'll get better again eventually. And that you just learn to kind of ride the waves, I guess. But
I agree.
Yeah, it's hard. So gaslighting is obviously a very dangerous thing. I think anytime that you let go of your own reality, or you are questioning your own judgment and your own thought processes, it's a negative thing. So we definitely want to talk about how to know if it's happening to you and what you can do if you're in that situation. I think most gaslighting situations, especially the extreme ones, probably started out with small things. I think if somebody was to gaslight you with an extreme thing from day one, you would know immediately that it wasn't real. Like if somebody had made a very serious promise to you, or you had a whole entire conversation with them, and then a day or two later they claimed it never happened, you would probably immediately know that they were lying and that, there was a serious issue going on. So I think in these situations, they probably start with very small things.
Yeah. They creep in slow, because if you do it too quickly, too hard, then they're like, okay, that's a sociopath right there. And you tend to steer clear from behavior like that. But if it's small, little subtle things, you kind of don't really notice it until you've been gaslighted and it's become a behavior thing that you're almost used to, and you've, grown accustomed to and
I think
okay with.
Any kind of abusive dynamic, which gaslighting is right there in the list of things, any kind of abusive dynamic usually starts out small and progresses into becoming a very dangerous situation. So these are, again, power dynamic relationships. I think gaslighting is mostly about power, control. I mean, that's, I guess, where most abuse comes from, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or even sexual abuse. Usually it comes all from a, power and control issue. So gaslighting is no different than that. And because usually if it happens with a parent or a relationship partner, your natural inclination is to believe what they're telling you. You want to believe them. So you always assume usually that person has your best interest at heart and they care about you, and you want to believe what they're telling you, which is what creates the opportunity for gaslighting to happen in the first place.
Yep.
And if it happens in a employer type relationship, then
that's still a power move. One person's still above the other. So what are you going to do? Speak up and say, actually, that is what happened. No, normally you're going to go with it because you don't want to get fired.
Right. There's a lot of,
you don't want to be a problem. It's a power move. So.
Right. And that there's a lot of intimidation and fear that goes into that, because we're changing the dynamic in employee-employer relationships, where people are much less willing to put up with things than they have in the past. I mean, most people in the old days, they stayed in the same job for 30, 40, 50 years, and they just dealt with whatever happened. But now, I mean, the younger generation, I know there's a lot of criticism that comes out about this from the older generation, but I actually think it's fantastic that they have very little loyalty to a company. If they're not being treated right, they stand up for themselves and they say, I'm not being treated right, like I'm out. I really respect that.
When you see some companies and some of the things that they put especially after this pandemic, what they put their employees through, why would you stand for that? There's so much opportunity out there, and it's so much more known how much opportunity there is because of technology and social media, all the things that we have access to, that we know how many things that are available, and so why stay in an environment where you're feeling less than, and it's causing you to have emotional or psychiatrical issues because, your boss or whoever, maybe not your immediate boss, but somebody who's above you has a control issue,
Right.
It really is about control, because somewhere down the line, that person didn't have control and they found someone that they could get control over. And it's just an easy target for them to play with control, whether it's a friend or a boyfriend, girlfriend, boss, whatever it is, it's always comes back to control,
Absolutely. And I think the only way that things are going to change in this country as far as work environments and how employees are treated is exactly what's happening right now with the Great Resignation and things like that, where a whole generation of people are standing up and saying, we're not going to take the low pay anymore. We're not going to take the bad working conditions. We're not going to take abusive behavior from bosses. We'll just leave. And that we're having a really hard time in this country right now filling service jobs, partly because of how employers treat them so disposably, and partly of how the general public treats service workers so badly. They're not willing to put up with it anymore. So, I mean, we have whole restaurants who have to close because they're short staffed. Or I think I might have told you that the Starbucks by my house has been alternating, where one day the inside is open and the next day the drive-thru is open because they don't have enough staff.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy. So, I mean, I think there's just so many new opportunities and ways to make money in this world that people aren't willing to put up with this anymore. And I, for one, love the fact that gaslighting is now not just a psychology term, but it's a mainstream term. And people are making everyone more aware of it so that when it's happening to you, you may be able to spot it. Where before you just thought that you were losing your mind, you were crazy.
Once you're aware of it, what's the next move though? Because I mean,
yeah.
Okay. So we've discussed the whole like employer thing. You could always change jobs. There's so much opportunity out there. That's always an option. But if it's a friend that you've had or that you are tight with, or maybe it's not even a friend you're tight with, but like not from personal example. I'm just thinking of like some weird relationships that are out there that are hard to get out of. Sometimes like you have mom friends that are friends with your kids that you can't just like buy because your kids are friends with them. You see them all the time. Or it's a spouse, like what do you do after you realize, okay, this is how I'm being treated? What do I do? Do you call them out on it? What's the next move after you realize you've been gaslit?
Yeah. So let's deep dive a little bit. So the term of gaslighting, it comes from a play that was called The Gaslight in 1938. It turned into a movie in the 40s. And the premise of the whole play or movie was about a husband who, he slowly convinced his wife to think that she was losing her mind, like basically playing tricks and things on her, making her question her entire reality. And he was doing that so that he could commit her to a mental institution because she had a lot of money. He was trying to steal all her money. Yeah. So that was where the term came from. And it was a very extreme example, obviously, of gaslighting, but that's why we call it that. And there's a lot of different ways that someone can, or techniques that someone can gaslight another person. Some of them are clearly intentional, and some of them can potentially be unintentional. The person gaslighting may not even be realizing that they're doing it.
They can do it out of like bad habit, because they're just that person,
Right.
It could be targeted sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, a good example of this is a girlfriend accusing a boyfriend of flirting with other girls. And he insists he is not flirting. He's not a flirt. He would never do that. And she's insisting, no, I saw you. I heard you the way you were talking to her at a party. They say there's a party they're both at, and she insists he was flirting. In his mind, maybe he was being polite. Maybe a girl was flirting with him and he was just being polite in response. Maybe he was even uncomfortable, but he was trying to deflect. Mm-hmm. But she may have had a bad thing happen to her in the past, or she may have some insecurities she's dealing with. And she saw that interaction. And in her mind, that was her reality, was he was flirting. And in his reality, he was just being polite. Mm-hmm. So that isn't an intentional gaslighting.
It's not control, it's insecurity.
It's insecurity and it's miscommunicated. Yeah, it's two people perceiving the same situation differently, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the different ways gaslighting can happen. So withholding, meaning someone refuses to even listen to you or insists they don't understand what you're trying to talk to them about. So if you go to your boss, your parent, your partner, and you say, this is going on and it's making me uncomfortable, or this, I'm feeling this way and I need your support. And they say, I don't even understand what you're talking about. Or I don't want to talk about this right now. I don't have time for this. They just withhold their presence from the conversation completely. That is a form of gaslighting. And countering is when the person, and this is almost always intentional, when the person directly questions the memory of the event. So if I was to say to my partner, we have this event tonight, make sure you're ready by 6. And he says, you never told me about that. What are you talking about? This is the first I've heard of it. When I clearly remember having a conversation with him about it. Now, in my case, it could be he was just not paying attention to me.
This is just a general example.
Right.
General public.
Maybe he wasn't wearing his hearing devices and he wasn't listening to me.
Yeah. Sometimes, man, can they just like selectively not hear?
Yeah, no, I actually have a really good example of this. My daughter, Samantha, had a prom pre-party at our house for all the parents to come, 50 kids. So that means there was like over 100 parents, because at least 2 for each kid, right? A lot of times there's more than 2 because they're divorced. So a lot of people at our house. And that that day I was setting out wine glasses and wine for the adults. I made a cheese plate. I did all this stuff. And my partner is like, what are you doing? And then people started like ringing the doorbell. And I was no. We're having this prom pre-party tonight. We discussed this many times. And he is like, you never told it. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, no, like we've been talking about it as a family almost every day for the last 2 weeks. And he insisted that we had a conversation about it, but no decision had been made. And that's where we left it. And I mean, I was almost in tears because I was so taken aback.
And it was too late to do anything about it.
They were ringing the doorbell, and he was really upset with me because he felt like I had moved forward with
in the snake about something, or
I was trying to be sneaky, and I had literally invited like 150 people over and not communicated that to him. Literally, and in my mind,
that came to my wedding, that's like a big party.
And the thing is, like, every single night at dinner as a family, we were talking about this event coming up.
Where was he? How is this so?
I don't know, but
miscommunicated here. This
makes
zero sense to me.
Exactly.
You're like, hello.
This was welcome
to my world.
This was a serious issue. Then, I mean.
So how did it get solved? Did he ever?
No, but he calmed down like 5 minutes in. He was schmoozing people and he was mingling and we had a great time. I don't know where the confusion came in. To this day, I still don't know, but everything worked out fine. The party went off without a hitch.
Oh my gosh, that's so weird. Because
it was literally
so weird. Like, what do you actually do other than like write it down on a piece of paper and then like tape it to his face?
But what I've realized,
I've had these moments happen too, where I'm like, dude, we've talked about this five times.
Right. What I've realized over the years is that if I'm having a discussion with like the whole family over a meal or something, there's a really good chance he's tuned out.
Like in Charlie Brown, when the adults talk, it's all like, wah, 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 wah.
Right.
He's not listening.
Even during the day, if he's just in like a work zone or he's doing other things while I'm talking to him, I can't count on him knowing what I said.
You need to directly talk to him.
Right. So what I do now, which has solved this problem pretty much completely, is that at night, at the end of the day, when we're both in bed and we're settling in to go to sleep, I run over everything that's going on over the next few days and anything I feel like I need to update him on, because that's when I have his full attention.
That's when I have Dan's full attention too, but I feel like that's when his brain is the most tired. And it's like, good luck remembering 30% of anything I'm talking to you about right now. Because it's like, he's done for the day. So if I'm like, let's talk about the next few days, he'd look at me like I was punishing him. So, which I wish I could do, because I'm like, now I have your full attention. Let's go over life, because this is when I get you. I get it.
Yeah. I guess you have to find your moments, I guess.
Yep. So
because
you felt gaslighted, right? That was the whole point of that story. You felt gaslighted.
I felt gaslighted. Yes. Like, but so did he.
Goodness. Mutual gaslighting on both sides. And it was just what are we going to call this? A miscommunication?
A mutual gaslighting.
Yes. I'm sorry. He's not in the room, is he? I feel like.
No, he's not in here.
Yes. No, one-sided. He wasn't paying attention. You have witnesses. You have alibis.
I know.
Come on.
And my daughter felt terrible because she felt like she had
guilty, right? Because like she was a part of the plot.
Right.
It never happened.
Yeah. And I felt like he was telling me I was crazy, and he felt like I was taking advantage of.
I think he's so good with people though, that it's like he could bounce back and say, was it forever okay after that? It was
it was totally fine.
After the people left, let's talk about this surprise party you threw.
The thing is, we threw the pre-prom party every year after that until my kids were done with high school, because it went off without a hitch. He was worried about, the wine in the house. It all went off without a hitch. And then he was fine doing it every year afterwards. So it just was that momentary, both had hurt feelings for 5 minutes and then it was solved.
Good thing that you bounced really well back with stuff.
Yeah.
We've talked about how.
Yeah, exactly.
Life doesn't faze you. You don't have time for it. But yeah, like mutual gaslighting on both sides is like, you just forgive, because sometimes like we've dove in so much to realize it is actually not just control. Sometimes it's insecurity. Sometimes it's miscommunication. We've talked about this when we've talked about relationship
tips in the past. And this is my biggest tip for anyone involved in any kind of a relationship. If you go through assuming that the other person has your best interest at heart and their intentions are good, and they assume the same about you, everything gets fixed really easily. Because if he says something that hurts me, or I do something that bothers him, we both assume it was not intentional, and that that the person wouldn't hurt us on purpose. And so it's much easier to get through it and forgive it and figure it out than it is when we assume the person is.
I think that also takes like maturity too. Cause what we discussed is like, until you hit around 25, everything is quote unquote the end of the world.
Right.
It's bigger than it really is. You learn after, 12 experiences with the same person that they're not really evil and they're not really trying to like ruin your life.
If you've had
human error.
If you've had a bad relationship in the past, or you've had somebody not have your best interest at heart, and finding that out is like the ultimate betrayal, right?
Yeah.
So that's hard to trust again after that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah. That's true. So, sometimes you come with some baggage.
Yeah. There's a few more techniques that are under the headline of the heading of gaslighting. So they call it blocking or diverting, which is when the abuser is changing the subject or is questioning the victim's thinking. So if they just want to change the subject, distract, or if they want to say, you're crazy, why would you even think that? I don't know what you're talking about. This is probably from your childhood, like whatever they want to try to make it your fault for thinking that way. When you're trying to explain to them that something is bothering you, or that your feelings are hurt, or that something they did wasn't okay with you, and they want to flip it around and make it a problem with you. Yeah. Instead of saying, wow, I didn't know that hurt you, I'll work on that. They say, well, you're crazy. That wouldn't this is my favorite one. When people go, oh, any reasonable person wouldn't have their feelings hurt by that. Any intelligent person would understand that I just meant this, which is a really like backhanded way of saying you're not intelligent or you're not reasonable. And it invalidates your feelings. It immediately says that, your feelings are not valid.
If this is how you feel, then you are crazy, or you're being illogical, or being too sensitive, or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was blocking and diverting. The next technique used by gaslighters is called trivializing. I could say that. Trivializing.
That's not a normal word to use all the time.
Where you make the person's needs or feelings seem unimportant, which is exactly what trivializing sounds like. So when you just say, you're making a big deal out of nothing, or I didn't even know this was going to upset you. Like, why are you being so sensitive?
I feel like that's used a lot. Like that's
I feel like it's used a
version of gaslighting.
I feel like it's used a lot, especially by gaslighting parents, I would say, of adult children.
I was going to say in like the junior high school world, like that
that too.
Organizational atmosphere, it's like used to decide who's the queen bee, so to speak, like, you know what I mean? It's weird.
But I've seen a lot of adult children in my own personal life, in my family, and friends, and then also videos that I've seen like on TikTok and Instagram and stuff of adult children who confront their parents as part of their therapy journey about things that happened when they were a child that traumatized them or affected them really deeply, and they've had the parents respond with, I don't even remember that. It was just, that wasn't even a big deal. Like, I don't even know why you're bringing this up, or whatever. I mean, obviously, like it was just a regular Wednesday for them or whatever, but for that person, it was an event that stuck in their mind and that they felt the need to talk about and revisit. And so that's what I think of when I think of trivializing. But I think also, like, I know my partner is very uncomfortable if I'm overly emotional. So I know if I need to talk to him about something that's bothering me or something serious that could cause him to be defensive, I need to do it when I'm super calm. Because if I come to him with tears and I say, you did this, you did that, he gets on the defensive instead of listening to me and saying, wow, I didn't know you felt that way. I definitely see that I need to work on that. That's the response I'll get. My
husband's like that too. I feel like guys don't know what to do because they see you crying, but they also are being accused of things. So it's almost like so much complexity of feelings at once that they want to be there for you, but also they're being attacked and they don't really know what it is. So if you're being calm, that it almost is like that, almost like they can take your feelings more seriously too. You don't seem so irrational and all over the place.
Right. That you don't get
a better response on your end too, if it's a more calm, rational, rather than coming in with tears and also guns blazing.
Yeah. Because then the response that you get is, you're being hysterical.
Goodness.
You're
and that,
really,
who does that help?
You're overwrought.
Yeah, sure.
Or being just told, relax. Oh, yeah. Every woman loves to be told to relax.
And gaslighting, right? You're being irrational. Oh, like then you start to think, am I being or every single thing that I'm now about to tell you, you're just going to bundle up with the irrational side of me, not like how I really am feeling and I'm having a moment of clarity.
Yeah. And
loudly,
I think as all adults who are in a relationship need to understand that the person they're in a relationship with has their own hot buttons and has their own past traumas that kind of color how they see things. So I happen to know from my partner that he's been around a lot of females in his life who used tears or emotion as a manipulation. Mm-hmm. So I need to come to him calmly to ask for what I need because he's really sensitive to feeling manipulated. Mm-hmm. So I know that about him. And it's not that I can control my emotions. Sometimes I can't. I need to step away. But when I'm calm, we can have a really good discussion. And we both really,
you look back and you go 0 times out of 10, has this worked out successfully when I haven't been calm?
Right.
If you're truly there to get your point across, to be heard, to get validated in whatever way, do it in a way where the success rate is going to be quite high,
Yeah. And I could say that's not fair. I'm allowed to feel the emotions I'm feeling and emote them. Of course I am.
That way. All you want.
But I also need to understand he's a human being and he has his own trauma past and he has his own issues. So do I.
He has his own side to it. There's our side, his side, and the truth sometimes. It's like sometimes it's not what we think. And when we calmly discuss it, we realize like, oh, my reality was a little warped because my emotions took over at the moment, or I, because of a past trauma, I made an assumption about something you were saying or doing and gaslighted you at the same time because I was, creating a reality you weren't actually doing. Sometimes I'll accuse my partner of doing things they were never doing or intending to do because of something that happened in my past. Yeah. And I'm just that's just where my brain goes,
Yeah. In the early parts of our relationship, I gaslighted him unintentionally many times we would get in an argument and I would tell him, you said I was stupid. You said I was immature. You said I was a child. You said this or that. And he would look at me and he'd be like, I never said any of that. But it took me working on myself to realize what was happening. So now I can come to him and I can say, when you say this, I hear this. And
that's a good one.
Yeah. Because but that takes work.
Yeah, it does take work because it's almost like I'm not calling you stupid. I'm saying what you're doing is stupid. What I mean? It's like, well, my brain heard one thing, it's like, I feel like this is what you're saying to me when you say these words. This is what my brain hears, And
I'm just as guilty of that. I will say you're acting like an asshole. And he'll say, you called me an asshole. And I said, no, technically I said you were acting like an asshole.
I have these conversations with my kids too. And I'm just like, no, I didn't say that. I said you were acting like a bully. I didn't call you a bully. I said you were acting like a bully to your sister, and then we have this conversation back and forth and I'm like, cool, no one wins. No one learned a thing with this. But you're trying to distort they feel gaslighted. And so they feel the need to respond defensively.
Yeah. So I learned that I was unintentionally gaslighting him. I didn't even have that word for it at the time, but I learned that I needed to wait until later when I was calm and really replay the actual conversation in my head so I could tell him what he was saying and how I heard. And now he's not responsible for what I hear. He's only responsible for what he actually says. But if I let him know that those are triggers for me or this is making me feel this way, I know he cares about me, so I know he's going to try not to use those specific words to me, the same as I do for him. So that's a mutual respect thing, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of calm discussions, not in the heat of the moment. But trivializing him, saying, that shouldn't even bother you. I don't know why you even care about that. Like, that's not very respectful of the other person.
Or sometimes your partner will know where these triggers are coming from and they'll kind of downplay them. Well, I'm not your dad, or I'm not your mom, or I'm not your ex. Okay, well, that doesn't mean these feelings aren't naturally coming up. Please don't downplay them. Like, yeah, you are not that person maybe, but this is triggering this. Let's work on it together.
Right.
Right.
Your partner should always want you to help you be the best version of yourself that you can be. And helping you heal past traumas and helping you work through some of your hot button issues is one of the ways that we do that for each other. Mm-hmm. But that takes, you have to work on yourself in the process, because they can't fix you. What's wrong with you? They can help try not to push the buttons, but you have to do the work to fix things that happened to you previously. So the last technique is forgetting or denial. And that is when the gaslighter denies or pretends to have forgotten what actually happened, or denies something that they agreed to previously. So if you have a big argument and they say, okay, fine, I won't text that girl from work anymore. I think it's silly. There's nothing going on, but if it makes you feel better, I won't do it. And then you find more text and you say, you promised. And they say, no, I didn't. I never said that. That's a very bad gaslighting situation. And if I were you, I would run the other direction.
Yeah, I'm like, this is a bad idea all around, but all right. Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, because you're like, wait a minute, it's just distorting reality, because you had an agreement, and then the person, even though they didn't feel like it was a good idea in the first place, are doing what they want to do anyway, but telling you one thing, but doing another, and that can really mess with the person's reality.
Yeah. And a lot of times, they'll start with something that's true and use that to make you question your own response to things, mm-hmm. by saying like, well, you have seemed a little off lately. You told me you weren't feeling good. Like maybe that was that day you had that horrible headache. Maybe that's why you don't remember, like twisting things. Or, a coworker could do this to you. A coworker could tell you, well, try to convince you that you haven't been pulling your weight around the office. Try to tell you, well, you have taken a lot of days off lately. Maybe this happened on one of those days you weren't here, something like that. So you have to, those kinds of things really, because if most people believe that people are generally good and people are not evil manipulators. So when someone says things like that to us, we really kind of like step back and search our minds like, oh my gosh, is this true?
It's like,
Did I do this?
It's like those shows. Have you ever seen those shows on True TV where it's like the magicians are like a grocery worker, but they make like the orange, like enlarged 4 times in size. And you're like, you start to believe things that aren't real because your brain searches for something. It wants to grasp something. Right. And the last thing we all want to do generally is to think that someone is being like, someone has ulterior motives, especially someone that we're kind of just meeting for the first time or getting used to, or worse off, someone that we've been with for years, and our spouse, or, our parents who we didn't choose necessarily. It can be really messed up when you're in a relationship that you love and love gets in the way. And so your reality gets distorted and you want to grasp something that isn't, this person's just being evil, And I know that sounds like so extreme evil, but like, you know what I mean? Like they have a motive that isn't in my best interest, or they have a motive that's only in their best interest and they're not even thinking about me, or like, it's just, we never want to believe that about someone that we either just meet or we love or care for deeply or is in our family. We always want to create some alternate idea, in our heads.
Yeah. And the thing is, the people who do this kind of behavior tend to be really charming people, really likable, charming outwardly people.
There's a reason that magicians are so charming sometimes. I know they have like a cheesy, but also they can be really, because they deceive you. You know, they're good at the art of deception.
Right.
You know, they distract you from what's really going on. You know, just like gaslighting, distracting you from what's really going on. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's
so. How can you tell if you're a victim of gaslighting? We have a list for that too. One of the first signs is if you're constantly second guessing yourself, or you have trouble making decisions. You always think you're going to do the wrong thing. You're going to choose the wrong thing. It's kind of like a walking on eggshells kind of a feeling. That's something you definitely need to explore. If it hasn't always been your personality to be indecisive,
of yours, you're always generally more secure, and now you're not.
Right. But ever since you started this job, ever since you've been dating this guy, ever since you have this new best friend, this is how you've been feeling. That's a red flag. You're really focusing on a character flaw that is a new perception for you. Suddenly you're thinking like, I'm really too sensitive, or I'm not a very good person, or something that you never really thought about yourself before is suddenly like right in front of your face, and you're feeling like you're really kind of ruminating on it. So that's definitely a red flag, because that the person who's doing this to you will make you think or make little comments here and there that will give you the impression, that you're not a good person, or you're overly sensitive, or you're hysterical, overly emotional, those kinds of things. So you definitely want to look out for that. If you feel like you're just losing your mind, you feel crazy, you're like, I know this, we had this conversation, but he's saying we didn't. And it makes you kind of question your entire reality. Yeah. And your judgment, your thought process, everything. If you're having what should be a rational, even-tempered, normal conversation, there's no bad feelings with the person who could be gaslighting you, and you're suddenly finding yourself in an argument that you had no intention to have, and that the situation doesn't warrant. Like, it should just be a simple conversation about taking the trash out, or having dinner next week with the so-and-sos.
Something triggered you along the way. And
right. Yeah. But the conversation is not making progress, and you keep saying the same things over and over, and you're not being heard, or the person's reaction is not appropriate to the situation. A big overreaction of anger and a big kind of turning around of blame. That's a big red flag. And you're always apologizing. You find yourself apologizing. We talked about this last week, the saying sorry all the time thing.
Which, by the way, blew my mind the entire week. Not only was I in tune with my own apologies, but also others. Like, I would hear other people apologize. I'm like, this was not necessary. So much. So blew my mind. But also made me realize, like, that's such an insecurity trigger. That's an insecurity trait. And maybe that was triggered by somebody gaslighting you along the way.
Right.
Now you're insecure all of a sudden, and you're saying sorry to everyone.
You distrust your own behavior or your own judgment. It's a very big red flag. If you constantly have to make excuses for your partner or friend's behavior, with family, with other people, if you're lying on behalf of them, when you say, oh, he didn't come to the family dinner, he's not feeling well, he had another commitment, and he just refused to go with you, didn't want to, made it seem like it was an unreasonable request, whatever, that's a pretty big red flag. And sometimes it's just like a gut feeling, like, something is wrong, but you don't know exactly what, and you just feel off, you're just unhappy and you can't pinpoint it. That might be something you can explore with a professional that can help you recognize if it's maybe you're going through a depression, or maybe you're being gaslighted. Sometimes it helps to have an expert to talk to about those kind of things, because when we're in the middle of something, it's really hard to see it clearly.
Mm-hmm. And when you were aware of it, sometimes it's hard to what do I do next? How do I go about it? Because sometimes it's like, a relationship you can't just exit from so easily,
Right.
like a parent or a sibling or, you know, a spouse that you have children with. And it's not necessarily like a deal breaker, but how do you bring it up in a way like you've talked about, you know, how to calmly discuss things with your spouse in a way where they don't feel gaslighted? How do you bring it up to where the behavior changes and they don't feel like, you know, how is it going to be a healthy conversation to where the behavior stops?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you feel like this might be happening to you, what are some things that you can do besides obviously talk to a professional? Anytime something's going on that is abusive or there's mental health involved, we always recommend that you talk to a professional. But I think the first step is obviously, they always say the first step in any problem is admitting or identifying that there is a problem. So that's definitely, if any of these things are ringing true for you, or you're recognizing your own situation in any of these scenarios that we're talking about today, that's a good first step, identifying that there might be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to give yourself permission to feel whatever emotions that you're feeling in whatever situation arises. Instead of telling yourself immediately, when you start to feel emotional, instead of telling yourself immediately, I'm overreacting, I'm being hysterical, I always do this. Try to give yourself permission to feel that, you know, maybe like go for a walk or sit in your car or whatever, and just feel your own thoughts and feel your own feelings without anybody telling you that it's not appropriate to do so. That will help you kind of work through whether or not those feelings are valid. All of us have times where we are overly emotional. Maybe something else is going on that we're avoiding dealing with, meaning that we have a bigger emotional reaction to things that we shouldn't. Maybe it's hormonal. Maybe there's something, you know, medical going on. Who knows? But we all have had scenarios where later on, we were like, wow, I super overreacted to that. But if you're being told that you're doing that all the time, maybe just sit with your feelings a little bit and kind of explore whether they're valid. Acknowledge them is a really big deal. I think everybody deserves to feel heard, even if they are being overly emotional. I mean, if you're feeling a feeling, that makes it valid.
Mm-hmm. And if someone in your life who is very influential is telling you your feelings aren't valid, then you need to go feel those feelings before they get to you first and tell you can't feel that way, because you might not have enough logical time to listen to yourself before you listen to them. You know?
Right, exactly. And a lot of the times in these kinds of scenarios, when there are people who have been involved in the situation, maybe you have family members, they may already have concerns about this relationship, whether it's a friendship or they've heard you talk about your work situation so much that they have their own. A lot of times people won't tell you how they really feel about your relationship until you ask them.
Until you're a little bit aware that there might be something going on. And then you're almost giving them permission to dive into it a little bit, because they don't know how you're going to respond if they just blatantly say something.
Right. So
bring it up. It's almost like, oh, cool, you're aware this is a little off.
Right. So
talk about it.
Find a family member or a close friend that you trust that has been somewhat engaged in the situation, either at holidays or parties and things like that, or has just heard you describe some of the situations enough times, and ask them, you know, I've been thinking about this and I'm concerned. What do you think? And I bet they would open up to you and tell you. It's like getting a second opinion and kind of clarifying your own thoughts.
I agree.
With someone who's outside of the situation and might be able to see it better. Mm-hmm. You know, all of our friends are always going to have our backs and take our side on things, but hopefully they're also, you know, willing to be pretty neutral about giving you solid advice on that kind of stuff if you're in an abusive situation, for sure.
Agreed.
I think you need to make small decisions for yourself outside of that dynamic. So it's a kind of a giving yourself permission to say no when you haven't been giving yourself permission to say no, or just refusing to engage in that power struggle. I had moments where my ex-husband, where he would be really pushing for an argument and I would be trying to walk away and walk away and walk away and just refusing to engage. Sometimes that's what we need to do for our own like mental health, not go through the argument or power struggle that the person is trying to provoke you to. And sometimes that can mean literally like getting in your car and going for a drive and separating yourself from the scenario. Sometimes it could mean just stating like, I'm not going to have this discussion with you right now. Whatever it means to you, like start taking some small steps to protect your mental health if you're in this power dynamic that feels like it might be abusive. I think that's a really hard step, but it's a really positive one to advocate for yourself in that way. I think one of the hardest things that once you recognize that you're in a situation where you're being gaslighted on a regular basis, and that is abusive, is that it's usually happening with someone that you care about. It's usually like your parent or your partner or best friend or something that it's not easy to step away from these people. No. These are people who are like the main characters in our lives. It's not like we can just say, oh, you're toxic. I'm never going to talk to you again. Maybe that's your mom or your husband, right? That you have a bunch of kids with, or a 20-year history, like 30-year history.
The dynamic of how you guys communicate from that point forward, because you're aware of what's going on and they are now aware that their behavior is no longer tolerated. And also no one likes behavior brought up that's not necessarily bringing someone positive. So you get immediately defensive. Like when you know going into it, it's going to cause maybe a little bit of drama. No one's excited about that conversation. And it's always harder the more connected you are to that person.
Right. You know? And there may be some parts of that relationship that are working for you and that are great. But, you know, if the relationship as a whole is making you have a low opinion of yourself, or making you question your judgment and your reality, and you've lost a lot of your sense of self, that's something you really need to evaluate. And you really need to go to individual counseling to work through that in your mind. And if it's a situation you need to leave, as you get healthier within yourself, you'll get to that point, if that's the case. And if it's something that can be fixed, if the person doesn't even intentionally know that they are doing that, or that's something that they're willing to work on, then maybe it can be fixed. But if you're in a relationship where everything that happens is blamed on you, everything, no responsibility is ever taken by the other person, and you're just kind of the scapegoat of everything, that's not a healthy dynamic. That's not an equal. The most important
relationship is the one you have with yourself. You know, you deserve better than that, no matter who this relationship is with. You know, you deserve to feel seen, heard, understood, and not be told that you're crazy or you're being illogical, irrational, whatever what you're being accused of. You know, it's you deserve to feel whole and healthy and happy. You know,
yeah.
And somebody is getting in the way of that. It shouldn't matter what the connection is. Does it make it harder when it's people like your parents or your spouse or, you know, whatever? Yes, of course. But it doesn't make that connection with yourself any less valuable. You know?
Right. And this could be someone that you really, if it's not your romantic partner, this could be someone that you really look up to. It could be your mentor. It could be your boss. It could be, like I said, a parent, someone who you think is really high achieving. And if they think you're, you know, bad or a loser, then you probably are, is the mindset. But we have said this before in other episodes. The only relationship that you're going to have for your entire life, and the most important relationship, the longest lasting, is the one that you have with yourself. So if someone is making you question what you know to be true about yourself, your intelligence, your character, your capability, your responses to things, your right to feel the emotions that you feel, all of those things that make you you. If someone is making it difficult for you to be the best version of yourself because it makes them come out ahead, then that's probably not the healthiest relationship for you to grow as a person and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, you've got to spend some time and evaluate, because it's not easy to end relationships. It's not easy to end friendships that are long-term. It's really not easy to isolate yourself from your family members.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I think the younger generation is better at. Seems like they're better at doing, making their own little families that they choose. But I know, like, my generation, family was forever, and you couldn't just not talk to your parents. Like, that wasn't even an option. What are you talking about? Like, now I see a lot of people my age and younger than me standing up for themselves and standing up for what's best for them. And I think it's a fantastic thing, because I think one of the things that we're here on in this life to do is to work through conflicts. I think the universe or whatever gives us conflicts that we need to work through in order to grow as a person. So I don't think you should just hit delete on every uncomfortable situation you're in.
No, not at all.
Yeah, because I think the way that you grow is by being able to see things from other people's perspective, put yourself in other people's shoes, and that helps us all be more empathetic, to grow as a person, take responsibility for our behaviors, all of that. But
I think that a lot of people back then got away with gaslighting and there wasn't a term for it, because they got away with it because they, relied on the fact, well, we're family, or I'm your parents. Like, and now they're realizing that they got to earn that just like everything else,
Right. There used to be this like patriarchal system where the father and grandfather or whatever were never questioned, and they could act and behave however they want. And everybody had to show them
respect, regardless.
Complete respect and deference, no matter how wrong they were, how biased they were, how abusive they were. And that is no longer the case. Those same people are looking at their grandchildren who are telling them, you can't talk to me like that, grandpa. And they're shocked because no one has ever called them on their shit ever.
And yeah.
And I love it. Personally, I love it. Yeah.
I love it because I think that it should be earned. And I think that people need to be reminded of that. And I don't think that that should continue anymore. So yeah, I think that for the first time, yes, we shouldn't just give up on every relationship that's just a little off. Yeah, push through. But, you don't have to stick in things that are unhealthy for you and abusive for you. Because they're your mom, dad's sister, right. Spouse.
A lot of the automatic things that were the case when I was a kid, we have unlearned as the generations have passed. Like, you have to give Uncle Bob a hug because he brought you a Christmas gift, or no, we have body autonomy now. We don't have to hug anybody we don't want to hug. Or respect your elders. Well, no, not unless they're also showing respect to me. It's a mutual thing. Those are great things I think we're unlearning for the younger generations. It's a balancing act, because at the same time that I want my kids to be respectful, I also don't want them to put up with any shit. So, when they were really little, it never occurred to me that they didn't need to hug somebody if they didn't feel like hugging them. That was so rude. It was
like rude if you didn't, I had to do that too. And you're like, oh, okay, fine. But then you're like, and then you're hugging and no one wants it.
Right.
Now we realize that people have a choice with their bodies.
Right. But the grandkids, we 100%, you don't feel like hugging, that's totally fine. And, my husband's a lot older than me. He came from that generation. So he's very much a love language is physical affection guy. So, he'll really get his feelings hurt if he doesn't get hugs from the grandkids. But I have to tell him, our granddaughter, like, that's not her love language. She's just not comfortable with hugs. Like, give her a high five, fist bump, whatever. And it's a hard lesson, but I think it's giving her strength because she's in control of how much physical affection. Her own
life boundaries. And
right. She's exercising her body autonomy to say, I don't like that. And that I think is 100% amazing. I remember being a kid and like being tickled and I hated it. Ugh, and they thought it was so funny. And I was like, crying. And everyone was like, why are you making such a big deal out of it? Because it's my body. If I don't want to be tickled, I shouldn't be tickled. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a funny thing. Things have changed is the point. And I don't think there was a term that people knew for gaslighting before, because I don't think it was something that was ever really made an issue of, as it should be. So I'm proud of
Lake now as a people. And it's more mainstream. As long as you know the term, then you can figure out when if this applies to you and where.
Right. I'm proud of the generations that are coming forward and the work that they're doing on themselves. And they're taking advantage of resources like therapy and mental health resources, and they're not accepting toxic situations. And I think we're evolving as a people in a way that's really beautiful. And I'm really happy to see.
I agree.
All right. Well, we would love to continue this discussion with you on our Facebook discussion group. If you look up She's a Full-On Monet on Facebook, we'll be right there. And we have an attached discussion group. We'd love for you guys to give us some examples that you might have just recognized that we're gaslighting, or that you've noticed,
or maybe you're questioning some and you're comfortable asking away and you need some just advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're unsure of.
This is something I think that everyone has probably experienced at some point in their life. And so we would love to hear your guys' experiences and examples. And again, we thank all of you for being here every week. We hit new milestones every month with this podcast, and we really appreciate every single one of you, especially, everyone who comes back week to week. So we just want to say thank you, and thank you for being part of the Monet family. And we really appreciate all of you, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. Don't forget to bookmark our site, she'safullonmonet.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you're enjoying this podcast, it helps us a lot if you can follow, rate, and review. See y'all next week.